The moment I decided to cut ties with my mother and sister, I thought it would bring peace into my life. But little did I know, this decision would unleash a storm that threatened to tear apart everything I held dear. At first, my mother's reaction seemed almost theatrical. She sobbed uncontrollably, sent countless letters begging for reconciliation, and called me hundreds of times, each voicemail more desperate than the last. When those attempts failed, she resorted to hiring private investigators just to track my every move. It felt like living in a nightmare where no matter how far I ran, her shadow loomed over me. Then came the ultimatums. If I don't see my grandchild, I won't be able to live, she cried during one of her rare moments when we accidentally crossed paths at a family event. To make matters worse, she began harming herself, cutting off her hair, refusing food, and even scratching her arms until they bled, all while blaming me for her pain. The guilt was suffocating. Every time I saw pictures of her gaunt face or heard about her self-destructive behavior from mutual acquaintances, I questioned whether I had made the right choice. Was protecting my unborn child worth breaking the heart of the woman who gave birth to me? My husband tried to reassure me, reminding me why we had taken this drastic step, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was betraying not only my mother but also the image of the perfect daughter I once believed I was. As if the constant pressure from my mother wasn't enough, my sister's relentless interference escalated to a level that felt almost criminal. She didn't stop at orchestrating secret meetings with my ex. She crossed every boundary imaginable when she began spreading vicious rumors about me and my unborn child. One day, while I was grocery shopping, a stranger approached me, her eyes filled with judgment. "Is it true?" she asked coldly. "Is the baby really your ex's?" My heart sank as I realized what had happened. My sister had been poisoning the community against me, planting seeds of doubt about my fidelity. The rumor spread like wildfire, fueled by whispers in church groups, school events, and even workplace gossip circles. My husband started noticing subtle changes in how people treated him. Friends who once joked around now gave him pitying looks. Coworkers avoided discussing family matters altogether, and some even hinted at offering advice on how to handle these situations. At first, he tried to brush it off, reassuring me that he trusted me completely. But the weight of the lies became unbearable. His boss called him into a private meeting one afternoon, asking awkward questions about whether everything was okay at home. It was clear the rumors had reached his professional life, threatening not only our marriage but also his career. The emotional toll on me was devastating. Every time I walked into a room, I felt like all eyes were on me, silently accusing me of something I hadn't done. I couldn't sleep without replaying the cruel words I'd overheard or imagining the smug look on my sister's face as she twisted the truth for her own gain. The anxiety consumed me so deeply that I stopped attending prenatal classes, terrified of facing anyone who might believe the lies. Even my closest friends hesitated to invite me to gatherings, unsure of what to say or how to act around someone embroiled in such scandal. When my husband confronted my sister during a rare family dinner, the tension reached a boiling point. "Why are you doing this?" he demanded, his voice trembling with anger. "Do you have any idea what you're putting us through?" My sister smirked, unfazed. "I'm just telling the truth," she said casually, as if ruining lives was an everyday hobby. That night, I broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably in my husband's arms. For the first time, I questioned whether we could survive this storm. How could I protect my child from a world that seemed determined to destroy us? Just when I thought the chaos caused by my family had reached its peak, my ex-boyfriend emerged as a new, more sinister threat. His obsession with me had never truly faded, but now it escalated into something far more dangerous. At first, it was relentless texts and calls, each message growing more desperate and manipulative. He claimed that destiny had brought us together and that I was making a grave mistake by choosing someone else. But his words were no longer just empty pleas, they carried an underlying menace. One evening, while my husband was out running errands, my ex showed up unannounced at my doorstep. His eyes burned with determination as he begged me to leave my husband and return to him. When I refused, his tone shifted from pleading to threatening. "If you won't come back to me willingly," he hissed, "then I'll make sure you regret it. I'll take you to court and fight for custody of that baby." The sheer audacity of his words left me trembling, but little did I know, this was only the beginning. The most terrifying moment came one night when I was home alone. My husband had taken our toddler to visit his parents, leaving me with some rare quiet time to rest. Suddenly, I heard a noise, a faint creak near the back door. At first, I dismissed it as the wind or perhaps a stray animal. But then, the sound grew louder, more deliberate. Before I could react, the door burst open, and there he was, my ex, standing in my kitchen like a ghost from my past. His presence was suffocating, his voice cold and calculated. "You can't keep ignoring me," he snarled. "I deserve to be part of your life, and if you won't let me in willingly, I'll force my way through." Panic surged through me as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. Thankfully, the police arrived quickly, but not before he managed to corner me in the living room, his threats echoing in my ears. That night, I sat on the couch long after he was gone, clutching a blanket around me, unable to shake the feeling that my home, the one place where I should feel safe, had been violated. The incident left an indelible mark on me. Every shadow seemed darker, every unfamiliar sound sent shivers down my spine. Even mundane tasks like checking the mail or stepping outside felt like walking into a battlefield. My husband noticed the change immediately. I became jumpy, paranoid, and constantly on edge. He tried to reassure me, installing extra locks and security cameras around the house, but nothing could erase the fear that lingered in the corners of my mind. It wasn't just about me anymore, it was about protecting my child from a man who seemed incapable of understanding boundaries. This wasn't love, it was possession, pure and toxic. And as much as I wanted to believe the nightmare would end, deep down, I knew my ex wasn't going to stop until he destroyed everything I held dear. The relentless pressure from my family and the constant harassment from my ex finally took its toll on me in ways I could never have imagined. One morning, as I was getting ready for a routine checkup, I felt an overwhelming wave of dizziness wash over me. My vision blurred, and my heart raced so fast it felt like it might burst out of my chest. Panicked, my husband rushed me to the hospital, where the doctors delivered devastating news. My blood pressure had skyrocketed to dangerous levels, and I was showing signs of preeclampsia, a condition that threatened not only my health but also the life of our unborn child. The doctor's words echoed in my mind like a death sentence: if we don't manage this immediately, both of you could be at risk. Being confined to a hospital bed while carrying my baby was a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Every beep of the heart monitor reminded me how fragile our situation was. My husband, who had always been my rock, suddenly seemed overwhelmed by the weight of everything. He quit his job temporarily to care for me, juggling between hospital visits, managing household chores, and dealing with the endless drama my family kept stirring up. At night, when he thought I was asleep, I'd hear him pacing the room, muttering under his breath about how he didn't know if he could handle it all anymore. His exhaustion became palpable, and seeing him break down made me feel even more helpless. We were drowning in despair, clinging to each other as the storm raged around us. What broke me the most was knowing that this wasn't just my battle, it was our baby's fight for survival. Each day felt like walking on thin ice, unsure if the next step would send us crashing into darkness. My mother's incessant calls and texts didn't stop, despite my clear warnings. Even lying in that hospital bed, hooked up to machines, I couldn't escape her voice accusing me of being selfish and cruel. Meanwhile, my sister continued spreading lies about my marriage, fueling tensions further. It felt like the universe itself was conspiring against us, testing whether our love and resilience were strong enough to endure. Just when I thought I had finally built a fortress of safety around myself and my unborn child, the ground beneath me crumbled once again. This time, the betrayal came from someone I least expected, a close friend I had trusted with my life. For years, she had been my confidant, the person I turned to when the weight of my family's manipulation became unbearable. But one day, while scrolling through social media, I stumbled upon a post that made my blood run cold. It was an innocuous photo of me at a cafe, captioned with details about my new address and phone number, information only a handful of people knew, including her. My heart sank as realization dawned: she had betrayed me, sharing my private information with my mother and sister. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound inflicted by my family. How could she, of all people, side with them? When confronted, she tried to justify herself, saying she only wanted what was best for me, and believed my mother deserved another chance. Her words felt like salt in an open gash. I couldn't fathom how someone who claimed to care about me could so recklessly endanger my peace, and worse, the safety of my child. Overnight, I went from feeling supported to utterly alone. The paranoia set in almost immediately. If she could betray me, who else might be lurking in the shadows, feeding information to those determined to control my life? I knew I had to act fast. Within days, I changed my phone number, moved to a new address, and deleted every trace of myself from social media. Even mundane tasks like grocery shopping or taking a walk felt like navigating a battlefield. Every stranger's glance seemed suspicious, every unfamiliar car parked near my home triggered panic. I stopped answering calls unless I recognized the number, and even then, I hesitated. My husband did his best to reassure me, but the damage was done. Trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to rebuild. I found myself questioning everyone, even acquaintances I'd known for years. Was anyone truly on my side, or were they all secretly complicit in this web of deceit? After the divorce was finalized, my father made a decision that left me speechless. He sold everything he owned, including the house I grew up in, and moved into a modest home just 10 minutes away from us. It wasn't about convenience, it was an act of sacrifice so profound that it brought tears to my eyes every time I thought about it. He said, "I've spent too many years standing by while your mother and sister tore you apart. This is my chance to make things right." And with those words, he became my anchor in the storm. Every evening, after work, he would come over to help with the baby or simply sit with me on the porch, sharing stories from his youth, stories I had heard before but now carried new weight. They weren't just tales anymore, they were reminders of how much he regretted not stepping in sooner. But this newfound closeness came at a cost. My mother and sister lashed out at him, accusing him of betraying their family for "that ungrateful daughter of yours," as my mother bitterly put it. Their attacks cut deep, not because they were unexpected, but because they forced him into a painful internal struggle. One night, after a particularly heated phone call with my mother, I found him sitting alone in his dimly lit living room, staring blankly at the wall. When I asked if he was okay, he sighed heavily and said, "Sometimes, doing what's right feels like losing everyone." His voice cracked under the weight of guilt and sadness, and I realized then just how torn he was between loyalty to his ex-wife and protecting his grandchild. Despite the criticism, he never wavered. On weekends, he'd take the baby for hours, giving me time to rest, and when my anxiety spiked, he'd remind me gently, "You're stronger than you think." Those moments, the quiet ones where we didn't need words, were the most healing. Yet, even as our bond grew stronger, I couldn't ignore the toll it took on him. The man who once seemed invincible now looked older, his shoulders burdened by the weight of choices he knew would alienate him from people he once loved. Still, he smiled through it all, saying, "As long as you two are safe, nothing else matters." Years after severing ties with my mother, I received a letter that stopped me in my tracks. It was from her, a handwritten note filled with raw emotion and regret. She admitted to every mistake she had made, acknowledging how her actions had torn apart our family and hurt me deeply. "I was wrong," she wrote, her words trembling on the page. "I let my desperation blind me, and in doing so, I lost the most precious thing in my life, my daughter." For the first time, I saw vulnerability in her words, not manipulation. Yet, as much as part of me wanted to believe her, another part, the protective mother within me, refused to trust so easily. I shared the letter with my husband, who read it silently before looking at me with cautious eyes. "What do you want to do?" he asked gently. The question hung heavy in the air. After everything we'd been through, the harassment, the betrayal, the threats, I couldn't risk reopening old wounds without certainty of change. Finally, I decided to give her a chance, but on strict terms. No unsupervised visits, no discussions about my past or marriage, and absolutely no contact with my sister. If she truly wanted redemption, she would have to earn it step by painful step. When I met her for the first time in years, she looked older, frilier, her hands trembling as she held back tears. "Thank you for seeing me," she whispered. Her voice broke something inside me, but I reminded myself why these boundaries were necessary. Though I still loved her, I owed it to my child, and to myself, to ensure history wouldn't repeat itself. As I walked away from that meeting, I felt a flicker of hope mixed with lingering doubt. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but perhaps it was possible, one guarded step at a time.